How to learn French vocabulary. Hello, if you're discovering this channel, my name's Chris. I'm a French teacher with OuiCommunicate. We specialise in teaching French to speakers of English. And if you've watched my videos before, well, welcome back. Your presence is much appreciated. In this video, we'll be talking about how to best learn French vocabulary. And I get this question quite often from students, how to best learn French vocabulary and how to memorise words. I think it can be useful to have a teacher's view on this, and I'll answer the question as a teacher as best I can. So let's start. The very first thing to do, as I see it, is to define the terms. To address the problem, we really have to define the terms. What do we mean by vocabulary? And I see very often that students don't always see clearly into the problem they're trying to solve. It's like saying, I need to be in better health. Yes, but what does it mean? Does it mean that what are we comparing it to? Does it mean that you can run 5 miles, or that you can do 10 pull-ups, or that you're cutting down on sugary drinks? What does it mean to be in better health? Because this is the core issue. It's more about the terms we're using when we talk about French vocabulary that in turn will allow us to see into the problem and how to solve it. So it's both in the terms we use, the goal we're aiming at, and the method we're going to use to solve that problem. We'll be speaking about all three in this video. So the terms we use when we mean vocabulary, the goal we're aiming at, and the method that we intend to use. So why am I saying that using the term vocabulary is too wide to constitute a real problem? Because every time we speak French, we are using French vocabulary, because any French word belongs to French vocabulary. So I think very often there's a sense of frustration from a learner who sometimes comes to the conclusion that they need more of it, more of this vocabulary thing, more vocabulary. And it becomes an issue of quantity and volume, but without really knowing why they need it or what exactly they need, or even what to do with it if even they had it. It becomes a thing, like I need more volume, I need more of this volume thing they call vocabulary. But in a sense you are already using vocabulary because you are uttering French words or sentences depending on the level you're at the moment. So this is why I think that using the term vocabulary is misleading and doesn't lead us to be able to solve a real problem. Now here's my first solution to the problem. We have to make distinctions within the French vocabulary. We have to break it down into categories and see clearly within this entity we call vocabulary, as we're calling it in the video. I see 3 parts that we can make within vocabulary. There's the necessary vocabulary, there's the marginal vocabulary, and there's all the vocabulary that would, if I had it, bring me to the same level as I have in English. Let's talk about the first one, the necessary vocabulary. This is the one without which there would be a breakdown in communication in the simplest of everyday situations. This would, if we didn't have it, it would cause a breakdown in communication. So this is whatever you anticipate, of course, your future needs in French to be, because that's important also. But I would say that, for example, if you didn't know how to say I have been, je suis allé, I have been to the supermarket, I have been to town, well, it would cause a breakdown in communication and it would be an issue. So I would place this formula, this conjugation, within the necessary vocabulary of French. Then we have what I call the marginal vocabulary. These are the words that you might use once a year, once every 2 years. Words such as bicycle spoke, drain pipe, flooding, all these words that will likely come up in a conversation once in a while, once every 2-3 years, unless of course you live in a region whose principal topics of conversation are bicycle spokes and drain pipes, but otherwise I think we can safely place them in the marginal vocabulary section. And to me this is very important, because when I teach French I think of strategy. What are the battles that I can win? What are the battles that are likely to come up and that I will need to win? And which are the battles that will never come up and that I'm, in a sense, not a bit wasting my time learning, really. I think we have to make a separation between the essential skills and the marginal skills. And as a third category, there's the vocabulary that will help me express myself as I do in English, and that helps me be on that same level with all the same skills that I have in English and that I'd like to have in French, with which I can express my thoughts with precision. This includes verbs and adjectives that are more specific. For example, you might not want to say great at every sentence. You might want to say enchanting or enthralling. And this part I find is the most ill-defined and the one that causes the most frustration in learners. sort of, I perceive what I can do in English, I like to do it in French, but I can't yet, and how do I get there? You know, it causes a sense of frustration because it is ill-defined. So here we have three separate categories that might help us see clearly into the problem. Are you lacking basic words? Is that the real issue? Are you clearly separating the necessary ones from the marginal ones? Are you trying to speak French as well as you speak English, which can be a bit of a wild goose chase, especially if we don't clearly define what we mean by what can I do in English versus what I can do in French. All this has to be defined, of course, to be able to win those battles, to go towards the problem and to solve the problem. I've had cases of students who shared their disappointment with me regarding each of the three problems. There are students who lack the basic vocabulary. Well, this is good news because all you need to do really is learn it. But then you also have the opposite side of the spectrum, the more advanced learners, such as I'm thinking of a couple of university professors, you know, who had a very elaborate vocabulary in English and who lectured at university and were learning French and were getting quite good at it, but felt this sense of frustration because they said, oh, I can say all these brainy things. They didn't say it like that, but that's what I gathered from it. They could say all these brainy things in English, but couldn't yet in French, and they were frustrated because they couldn't really grasp the problem. They knew there was a problem, but they didn't know how to call it. What are the words I can use in English but not in French? So whatever the problem is, in each of the three cases, I always see students who don't quite locate the issue. And vocabulary becomes sort of the go-to solution. I need more of it. I need more volume of vocabulary. I just need more of it. But again, I think we need to look at what we're trying to accomplish exactly. And what are the battles we're trying to win? As I said in my work as a French teacher, I strongly separate the marginal skills or the marginal vocabulary from the necessary skills and the necessary vocabulary. I think it's all about asking ourselves, in a span of 1 year, how many times realistically will I need this word or that skill? And I consider that speaking French with the same richness as we speak English is a separate pursuit altogether. And here we're rather trying to find our personality or our self-image in another language. For example, someone who's in the habit of describing things with high precision in English might feel this frustration in French. I've seen it happen, as I said, to a couple of university professors who felt too limited compared to what they could do in English. But that again is a bit of wild goose chase, and it's very ill-defined, and it's not really a battle that we can win very easily. So to conclude on this first remark, I think it's important to locate the problem. What do I call vocabulary? What problem am I trying to solve exactly? Am I sure I'm distinguishing between the necessary words and the marginal ones? Am I not rather trying to duplicate my English skills in French? Once I know this, I can start to direct my attention towards learning, and I can ask myself questions such as, for example, do I know all the words for clothing in French? Can I name all the parts of a vehicle in French? That's a precise question. That's a precise objective that I can win. That's a battle I can win. Another question I can ask myself is, am I missing the skills to express an idea in the future tense in French? This part has more to do with conjugation. But again, it's a goal that's defined. It's a battle I can win. Am I trying to sound more literary? This part would best be solved by more exposure to classic French novels, I find. So we have to ask ourselves, what exactly am I trying to accomplish, and what sort of vocabulary am I after? So by knowing which problem we're trying to solve as pertains to vocabulary, well, the more chances we have, of course, of solving this issue. And if you're lucky enough to be working with a teacher, I'm sure they can help you navigate in the language. Otherwise, as I say, there's too much vagueness. Vocabulary is not a problem in itself. There's no solution to vocabulary. It's like saying I need a prettier interior in my house. Well, what does it mean? What are we talking about? Are we talking about the colours? Are we talking about the position of the furniture, the style of the furniture, the type of furniture, the carpet, the curtains? What are we talking about? There are many variables that I can work on. So we have to narrow it down. In the second part of this video, I'd like to talk about how to learn the vocabulary, because once we know what we're looking for in terms of vocabulary, then we can ask ourselves the question, well, how do I learn it? And my answer is always the same, and it reflects my general approach to teaching French. What is the most likely way we will retain it so that it sticks, and which is the most likely way to be quite sure we've covered all the necessary parts of the language and not miss any. Among the options available, we quickly notice that we don't have too many. Once we write it down as an actionable plan, picture yourself, I'm going to learn vocabulary relating to, I don't know, houses, gardens, city, clothes, I need more adjectives, I need more tenses. What is the actionable plan that you can put together for this to happen? And I find that we have two options. Option one, hoping that it happens. Learning by osmosis, hoping that it happens. Number two, learning it in an organized way. And these are honestly the two only options available. One, hoping it happens. Two, going towards the problem and learning the vocabulary in an organized way. The question here is which is the quickest and most effective way, and also which is the most complete way that won't leave too many gaps in my knowledge. Option A, we can divide the vocabulary into sections such as gardening tools, office supplies, animals, insects, parts of the body, and learn them. This is rather more strategic, you might agree. Option B, we can hope that we encounter these words by accident and hope that we remember them by repeated exposure. And in this approach, I already see two big problems. Learning by osmosis or learning by repeated exposure. One, will I encounter them? Two, will I remember them? These are two very big uncertainties when it comes to this learning approach. At this stage in our discussion, I like to put language learning aside and look at other fields of life, be it a skill or a piece of knowledge that we want to acquire. For example, how would I find the cheapest and most effective way to book an airplane ticket? What would I do in everyday life? Option A, by hoping I encounter it by accident. Option B, by researching it and learning about the different methods of booking a plane. Two options, right? Problem B, how will I learn to improve my serve in a game of tennis? You play tennis, you notice that you're not happy with your serve, how can you improve it? Well, here also I think you have two options. Option A, by hoping it happens through games that I play with my friends. Continue playing every Saturday, every weekend with your friends and just hoping it happens. Option B, by booking a court, going there alone with a number of balls, watching videos that contain advice, and by practicing. And the third question is, how can I learn to bake a cake? Option A, by improvising a recipe and trying a number of times until the results look like a cake a few years later. And option B, by opening a recipe book and by watching video. I think you understand my point. All this being said, to many learners there'll still be a measure of doubt. I find this very interesting because of the perception that languages are separate to the three examples I gave. Yes, but surely languages are different from baking a cake, learning to play tennis, or booking a plane. Languages are a bit different, aren't they? As if they belong to a separate rule of life. And this is understandable. I'm not blaming anyone, because languages are seen as an everyday skill that's natural. So we somehow believe that vocabulary should also happen in a natural way, because after all, well, self-expression is natural, isn't it? And also to blame probably is, I think, the repeated mention by many schools and websites of don't learn in a boring and old-fashioned way, and many schools and different learning methods say that. They've been saying that since the 60s, since the 50s. I mean, it's nothing new under the sun. If you care to open old Life magazines that are available on Google, you see the same sort of thing. There's always a shortcut in language learning. It's quite amazing. As if they had cracked the code to learn a language by osmosis. Before we go too far, I'd like to recenter the question and make quite sure that it's not so much what works best that interests me, but what will get us to the finishing line sooner. That to me is the central question. And which is the way that's sure not to leave any gaps in our knowledge. So I'm not putting down any specific method of learning. I'm really looking at it as if I was an army general or a business owner and I had to put into writing a plan that works. What's the plan that works to get me to the result in a sure way, in a quick way, and in a guaranteed way? I think it may be useful to speak about specific examples when it comes to vocabulary. Let's take 5 words of vocabulary. the carpet, le tapis, the earwig, le mille-pattes, the frame, le cadre, the picture frame, the crumb, la miette, and the heel, le talon. 5 words of vocabulary. These are 5 words that relate to everyday things, spread over different fields. We have insects, we have and so forth. Let's now consider the different options that we have to learn these words. Well, we have podcasts, we have films in French, we have reading, we have music, we even have conversations with a tandem partner. I can't think of many more personally. These are 5 ways of being exposed to the French vocabulary. Let's project ourselves into a realistic situation. You're listening to your favourite French podcast and they mention j'ai sali le tapis avec mes chaussures, or maybe they'll be speaking slower. J'ai sali le tapis avec mes chaussures. I dirtied the carpet with my shoes. That's a sentence they happen to mention in your favourite French podcast. Then they go on to speak about other things. You know, the guest might say, ah oui, c'est vrai, ah oui, ah, tu as sali le tapis avec tes chaussures. Oh, ma femme n'était pas contente parce qu'on attendait des invités, alors j'ai dû sortir l'aspirateur et on a aspiré, and so forth. But you're going, oh, wait, what was that? What was the word they used there? You pause the podcast, you rewind. What was that word? Tapis. It sounds like tapis, you look it up, go on your computer, you look it up, tapis, or maybe you have the translation, I don't know, I think some podcasts do that. So what are we doing? We're putting the podcast on pause, that's what we're doing, right? We've paused it, we're zooming in on a word to say carpet, tapis, and perhaps even we write it down to remember it. And we come to the happy conclusion that we now know how to say carpet in French, tapis. And we might say, oh, that's how we say carpet in French, is it tapis? And the podcast is still on pause, right? So, in a sense, if you look at it this way, podcasts aren't too different from learning the cold hard way, the way that's criticised by all the don't learn in the old-fashioned boring way. It's not too different, really. It's just the delivery that's a bit different. Because we are still focusing on a certain word that we didn't know, we are still trying to remember it, and we're concentrating and dedicating some time to it. Because we paused the podcast, we wrote the word down, tapis, carpet, that's how you say it, okay. So we're trying to remember the French word for carpet. Doing things this way means that our way of encountering the words is a lot more disorganized than if we had used an organized listing. And the podcast might very well never have mentioned the word carpet. And they might not have mentioned it for a full year. So that would have pushed back to your learning of the word carpet for a full year until they mentioned it. But after a full year, if they had mentioned the word carpet, you hadn't noticed it, or you had skipped that word, maybe they would have mentioned it again a year from now, so that would have taken you 2 years to learn the word carpet. Now, of course, if you're lucky, they might mention the word carpet within the first week of the podcast, which means that it only took you a week to learn the French word for carpet. However, if they don't mention the word keyboard for a full year in their random conversations, we have the same problem all over again. It might take you a full year before encountering and learning the French word for keyboard or windowsill or garden fence, and I'm sure you follow the reasoning. To summarize this idea, encountering new French words by means of a podcast is very random, but also the fact of encountering them won't guarantee that we'll know them next week. That's another problem also, unless they repeat the word carpet, tapis, in every single podcast, of course. Then again, how many times would it take for them to repeat this word until it sticks? How many times would they have to repeat this? 5, 10, 15? Would they have to repeat the word tapis up to 15 times for you to remember it? I don't know. Then again, what are the odds? Until this happens, we're still putting the podcast on pause and writing down the new word on a little flashcard. There's not much difference, really. It's just that the organisation of these words is a lot more random. We can't go towards the new word. We have to wait until it comes to us. It's very random. And I feel that this argument is true for podcasts, films, music, and conversations with a tandem partner. We're waiting for the words to be presented to us in a random way, and only when we've encountered them can we start to learn them. And if you think about the example of the word carpet, well, if your podcast or your film or conversation partner, whatever, music, songs, doesn't happen to use the word carpet, well, it will take forever to learn it because it just never came up. So what all these cases have in common, whether it's a film, music or podcast, is that we still have to put our source of learning on pause and go towards a more traditional way of learning anyway, is that we have to write down our word in order to memorize it. We have to dedicate a bit of study time to that word if we want to remember it. And also it's one thing, of course, to understand a word, so you can understand it passively, the word carpet. You can deduce what it means from the context, but you might not actively know it. I think that the exception to this is reading, because in a sense we're already doing two things at once. We're carefully reading, we're trying to understand, and already focusing on the text. We're functioning at a similar speed to studying anyway, so that to me is a big difference. We don't have to pause a fast activity such as listening to a song or listening to a podcast. We don't have to pause a fast activity to bring it down to a slower speed. We're already at a slow speed, so I think there's more harmony there, and it can be easier to jot down words, such as when you're reading a novel, you jot down the words you learn that are new to you. So in this, I would say that reading in French might be the better way of encountering new words or vocabulary. I hope this video was useful to you. I would suggest to any learner of French to think about what type of vocabulary you're looking for and what problem you're trying to solve. And the second thing is to think about what is the most strategic way I'm going to learn this vocabulary. What's the most strategic way that's going to get the job done in the most organized way, in a manner that will guarantee long-time learning. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Chris from OuiCommunicate. Bye.